While most Americans support taxing the rich, it is not a top-ranked issue for many. Only 1% of Americans say the nation's biggest problem is the rich-poor gap. Frequently, wealth accumulation is driven by changing or having new legislation and tax laws written and passed to leverage their self-interests. In 2008's Davis v. FEC, the court struck down the Millionaires' Amendment, allowing opponents of wealthy self-funding congressional candidates to bypass contribution limits. Citizens United v. Federal Election Commission 2010 was a landmark decision of the Supreme Court regarding campaign finance laws and free speech under the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The court held 5-4 that the free speech clause of the First Amendment prohibits the government from restricting independent donations for political campaigns by corporations, including nonprofit corporations, labor unions, and other associations. The decision remains highly controversial. Former President Obama stated it gives the special interests and their lobbyists even more power in Washington. The ruling represented a turning point in campaign finance. While the long-term legacy of this case remains to be seen, studies by political scientists have concluded that Citizens United worked in favor of the electoral success of Republican candidates. Citizens United did not spur on the explosion of big money and secret spending alone. It was enabled by several court decisions that surgically removed several restrictions in campaign finance law, solidified by inaction from Congress and gridlock within the Federal Election Commission. The mishmash of campaign finance rules spawned by the Supreme Court will likely stay in place for quite some time. The court overruled two major Supreme Court decisions, Austin v. Michigan Chamber of Commerce and McConnell v. FEC, allowing corporations and labor unions to use money from their treasuries to fund electioneering expenses and independent donations that expressly advocate for or against political candidates. In Speech Now v. FEC, an appeals court case heard later in 2010, judges applied the Citizens United precedent to PACs. The court ruled that a political action committee may accept unlimited contributions from individuals, corporations, and unions if they do not contribute to candidates or coordinate their activities with candidates or parties. The FEC subsequently allowed the creation of independent expenditure-only committees, now known as super PACs. Ensuing court rulings further implemented the new precedent. In 2011, a district court ruled in Carey v. FEC that PACs could accept unlimited contributions to one bank account solely for independent expenditures and maintain a segregated account to give candidates money. The FEC subsequently allowed the creation of hybrid PACs, which can act as PACs and super PACs. The decade that followed was by far the most expensive in U.S. elections. Independent groups spent billions to influence crucial races, supplanting political parties and morphing into extensions of candidate campaigns. Wealthy donors flexed their political power by injecting unprecedented sums into eroded transparency as dark money groups, keeping their funding secret, emerged as political powerhouses. Despite fears that corporations would dominate elections, wealthy individual donors are the most prominent political players. Over the last decade, the 10 wealthiest donors and their spouses injected $2.2 billion into federal elections. Political candidates are dwarfed by independent groups that often morph into effective arms of political campaigns and parties. Outside spending surpasses candidate spending regularly. Since the ruling, corporations have accounted for up to 1/10 of independent groups' fundraising in each election cycle. Instead, secretly funded nonprofits and trade associations that influence elections take money from major companies in primarily unknown amounts. In 2014, the court struck down a section of the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act that limited how much an individual donor could give candidates and parties every election cycle. The court ruled 5-4 in McCutcheon v. FEC that these limits were unconstitutional, expanding on its logic in Citizens United that wealthy donors' increased access to candidates is not corruption. The decision enabled the growth of joint fundraising committees that solicit extensive checks from a handful of wealthy donors and distribute the money among various committees. Following the court's rulings, campaign contribution limits to candidates, traditional PACs, and parties remained intact. The court reaffirmed the ban on unlimited soft money contributions to political parties for party building expenses and the prohibition on direct corporate contributions to candidates and parties. The court also affirmed the need for campaign contributions to be disclosed to the public, an assurance undermined by the majority's decision granting new powers to dark money groups.